Very good. We're going to get started with the meeting of the Regional Flood Control District. Mr. Parrish.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Item number 1 is comments by the general public, and can we just point out that Paul Wanless is on the phone? Can you hear us okay, Commissioner or Councilman Wanless?
Yeah, I hear you fine.
Okay, thanks so much.
And also just note that Commissioner Segerblum is excused from today's meeting.
So item number 1 is comments by the general public.
This is the first time it's set aside for public comment. This time is limited to comments on items on today's agenda. Those wishing to speak on posted agenda item, now is your opportunity. Please step forward to the microphone, state your name, spell your last name for the record, and please limit your comments to 3 minutes. Seeing none, we'll go ahead and close the first public comment period, and I'll turn it back to Mr. Parrish.
Item number 2 is action to approve the agenda with the deletion of any items. Mr. Chair, the agenda is in order for approval.
I'll entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
There's a motion on the floor. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries.
Item number 3 is action to approve the minutes of the June 13, 2024 meeting. And Mr. Chair, the minutes are in order for approval.
All right, I'll entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
There's a motion on the floor. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries.
Item number 4 is annual elections. Mr. Chair, as required by NRS, every July we're required to elect a chair and vice chair for the board and elect a secretary of the board. As I understand it, Commissioner Jones and Councilman Barone are willing to continue as chair and vice chair. Ms. Deanna Hughes is the secretary, so if that's the will of the board, staff would recommend that we appoint Deanna Hughes as secretary, and someone can make a motion for chair.
All right, there is a motion second before the board. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. And on behalf of myself and Councilman Barone, thank you very much for your confidence. We appreciate it.
Item number 5 is to discuss the general manager's monthly report. Just one item to talk about today. We did have our Flash Flood Safety News Conference on June 25th, and thanks to Chair Jones for coming out and speaking at that. We also heard from Assistant Fire Chief Brian O'Neill from the Clark County Fire Department, as well as our lead meteorologist, Chris Outler, with the National Weather Service, as well as myself. So we had a great turnout. Next slide, Andrew. All the major news networks attended, including Channel 2 and 4. We had newspaper, Sun, RJ, Spanish stations, as well as Spanish print attended. So great coverage on the event. The media coverage per our tracking agency showed that there were 367,000 views with a total value of $104,000 of advertising. And then online and print of 1.7 million for a total of 18,000. So great turnout. Of course, we're always trying to ramp up our outreach at this time of year. I'll talk a little bit more about that during the proclamation item, but thanks to all of the news media and everyone who attended, and thanks to our public information team, Michelle French and Jacob Sanders, for setting everything up for us. It's just a great event, and we're glad that the media is committing every year to participate on these events, so it gets our message out. So that concludes my report. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. I just want to say your team are pros. You can tell that by the caliber of all the news media that are there and show up every time, and the way it is organized. So thank you to your team. Any other comments or questions? Hearing none, turn it back over.
Thank you. Part 2 of your agenda is the consent agenda. These are items 6 through 11 and are considered to be routine and may be acted upon in one motion.
All right, I'll entertain a motion on the consent agenda.
Move to approve.
There's a motion on the floor to adopt the consent agenda. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 All right, any opposed? Hearing none, the consent agenda is approved.
Part 3 of your agenda is discussion items. Item 12 is action to approve a proclamation that July 2024 be proclaimed Flash Flood Awareness Month, and all residents and visitors be urged to make themselves aware of the dangers of flash flooding in order to take the necessary precautions in preventing the loss of life and property. Mr. Chair, as we mentioned earlier, it's this time of the year where we try to ramp up our outreach to the public and make them aware of the dangers of flooding. We do that through this proclamation as well as our advertising campaign and the Flash Flood News Conference as well. We just want to remind everyone out there that the storms are coming. July, August, and September is our flash flood season. We worry about the most this time of year in terms of these intense thunderstorms that we tend to get in the summer months. Just a reminder, we did have 3 fatalities last year. 2 of them were people experiencing homelessness that were living in the system and got swept up with flood flows. But one was a 13-year-old boy who decided to inner tube in a roadside ditch and wound up getting pinned in her vehicle and drowned. So all 3 of those were very preventable, and we want to make sure that that message is out that these flood flows are dangerous, or you don't want to play in them. We'll let these deaths be tragic reminders to everyone not to go into flood channels or into any type of wash for that matter. It's just a dangerous thing to do. There is some weather coming, believe it or not. We've been under a high pressure system, but that's starting to break a little bit, and we're going to see some humidity and some moisture coming into our area we're expecting this weekend, which can trigger some thunderstorms as early as this weekend. So just be on your guard. Remember that you can go on to regionalflood.org and get good advice on how to stay safe during flood events. Also, you can click on rainfall and weather and see all of our rain gauges in real time. Tells you where it's raining and how much, and if you're getting ready to drive home from work, check the gauges and see if it's raining on your commute. Maybe pick another way to go home. So with that, staff would recommend that you approve the proclamation.
All right, I'll entertain a motion to approve the proclamation.
Move to approve.
All right, there's a motion on the floor. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries.
Item 13 is action to accept and receive and accept a presentation from Hobbs, Ong and Associates, Inc. on the district's financial funding model, or take action as deemed appropriate. Mr. Chair, every few years we have Hobbs, Ong prepare a financial funding model for us to kind of estimate revenues in the future and how long it will take to implement our master plan. So we do have a presentation prepared, and Mr. Guy Hobbs is here to present this morning.
So, as was mentioned, we maintain a financial funding model for the Regional Flood Control District and have for several years, and periodically we go through an evaluation like this to look at the total master plan and try to make a determination how long it will take to build out the master plan. So I'll briefly walk through some of the findings from the most recent update of this report. On this slide, this gives you a little bit of context for the work that was done. Again, we're using the facilities master plan, totaling $3.5 billion in current dollars. We recognize the operating and reserve requirements that the flood control district has, and just take a moment to mention and remind everyone that the flood control district has always had a rather conservative approach to funding and financing its projects. The sole source of revenue, as you know, not the sole source, but the primary source of revenue would be sales and use tax, complemented with some interest earnings. And determination was made several years ago to largely fund the projects on a pay-as-you-go basis and limit bonding to no more than half of the annual sales tax. And the flood control district doesn't even come close to that with respect to the bonding side of it, which puts more of the dollars into the projects and less into interest repayment over time. But they're limited in their ability to discharge the projects by virtue of the amount of sales tax that comes in each year, and we'll talk a little bit more about sales tax as we go through this. On the next slide, this is usually where questions emanate from with respect to how we do the funding model. These are the key variables used in the study: sales and use tax projections, interest earnings projections, growth in operating costs in both the maintenance work program and the local drainage CIP. The conservative operating practices of the district to limit its operating expenditures to no more than 10% of its annual sales tax revenue, and to size the maintenance work program to annual transfers of $22 million, increasing every 10 years by 10%. certainly feed into this, and the local drainage CIP is also constrained to 1% of the annual sales tax. All of the project costs in the models have been inflated to year of expenditure dollars. And all of this is done to determine the length of time it may take the Regional Flood Control District to complete all of the projects on its current master plan. And this one sort of sums things up for you. We looked at 3 different scenarios, one that we refer to as the base case scenario. So using the same types of projections that the Regional Flood Control District would use in its budget, for example. 3% growth on sales tax, and it's been an interesting, I'll just deviate for a minute, it's been an interesting 3 or 4 years monitoring the growth and performance of sales tax. I think all of you at your individual entities have been monitoring that and seeing the same thing through C-Tax or whatever you may be monitoring, but sales tax obviously over the last several years into and through COVID and then beyond COVID, it's not a normal trend line that we've been seeing. And while we had significant recovery in sales tax for a couple of years, we've sort of hit a plateau, and more modest growth rates in sales tax are expected on an ongoing basis. And a lot of that has to do with the spend down of stimulus monies and other things that were put into the economy, and certainly the delay in spending that occurred post-COVID. So that's been a particular challenge for Jessica and the financial folks at Regional Flood Control District, and in speaking with them, speaking with the RTC, some of the other entities, we all try to maintain some alignment in terms of how we look at the sales tax growth on a going forward basis. But the base case assumes that we would have 3% growth rate in sales tax going forward, and that's comparable to what we're seeing in the current year. And if we had that 3% growth rate, and if the Regional Flood Control District stayed with its conservative practices of how it funds and finances its project, you can see from looking at this slide that it would take 32 years for a full build out of the current master plan. And it's one of the differences too with a master plan like the Regional Flood Control District. It's a little bit more finite in a sense because it's largely based on topography. Obviously, it's influenced by growth in the valley as well, but it sort of runs a different pattern than you would see with something like RTC, right? Where growth directly leads to more need for roadways. The second scenario is, what if sales tax grew a little bit faster? We increased the growth rate on that to 4%. And as you might imagine, logically, that a faster growing sales tax base would lead to a more rapid build out of the entire master plan. So our estimate at this point, using a 4% growth rate, is that the master plan could be built out in 28 years. And then we look at a debt case, and this is just an illustration. It doesn't necessarily represent the plans that Regional Flood Control District has, because it generally bonds as it needs to bond. And as I mentioned earlier, a bit more sparingly. And again, that serves them well in time because more of the dollars received from sales tax are going directly into projects. So we made an assumption of $700 million worth of bonding, $100 million done every 3 years. What that allows the Regional Flood Control District to do is accelerate certain projects. So you can get more projects done earlier by using bonding if there are higher priority projects or projects that may not necessarily match up to the cash flows from sales tax. Bonding is certainly a way to make that fit. But under a bonding assumption of $700 million, $100 million again done every 3 years, 32 years to complete the master plan. So basically what this tells us is completing the master plan is going to take somewhere, based on current conditions, somewhere between 28 and 32 years. And I've included some additional slides, and these are always a lot of fun. I'll leave you to look at these because it's really just a restatement of everything that we've talked about. This is the base case scenario. It may be interesting for you to look at the right side. That's the composition of expenditures. Under the base case scenario, you see that a vast majority, 69%, is going directly into projects. You'll see the maintenance work program, the cumulative operating expenditures. Again, the conservative fiscal practices of the district show very well in charts like this. The next slide is the higher growth scenario. You see some more projects being done. That's hand in hand with what we just talked about in terms of being able to deliver more sooner. If you have more revenue, you should be able to deliver more projects. And this is the debt scenario. And the biggest difference here is on the right side of the pie chart, you'll see a larger piece of the pie being devoted to debt service because we're issuing more debt over that period. So with that, I would be happy to take any questions you may have.
Any questions or comments, Councilman?
Could you tell me what interest rate you used for your bonding interest rate?
Certainly. That's always a tough one to assume going forward, and I wish we had a crystal ball on that. But what we assume is 5%, which is an overstatement of what we think current rates are. But over a lengthy period of time, I don't think that's pretty common for most of the financial modeling we do.
Okay. And then my second question is, if I understand your models correctly, it takes the same amount of time whether we bond or don't bond. Is that
That's
accurate?
correct.
That seems a little strange to me because if we bond, we have immediate cash to do those projects. Wouldn't it speed that time frame up a little bit?
Well, what it does, and certainly the Flood Control District Administration can comment on this as well, the bonding allows more projects to be done sooner, but you're adding the extra cost of interest to those projects, which gets carried out over time.
Okay, I understand. Maybe I misunderstood because I thought your 32 years was to complete the master plan.
That's correct.
And so if we bond and we do that quicker, because we have capital, wouldn't that reduce the number of years to complete the master plan?
Yeah, just the way it works out, I think that, like Guy said, that you're paying more interest when you sell the bonds up front, so you have less pay-as-you-go in the out years, and so at the end of the master plan, it just happens to work out that it's about the same time. So there's a benefit based on the modeling to front load our plan and get bond money and build facilities quicker because we want these facilities in the ground protecting life and property, right? And so it makes sense then for us to do bonding when it seems appropriate. And so
So it accommodates us on a need basis as opposed to a completion. So if we have a need that isn't in our current revenue stream, we bond to fulfill that need. Okay, I get it.
Councilman?
Yeah, no, thank you very much for the presentation. These models, like on the bond formula, did that also take into account costs that, I know sometimes they're very hard to account for, opportunity costs. Front loading, of course, and bonding right now, if we're building homes, right now lumber is really super cheap, when just like 3 years ago, you went broke trying to get lumber for your project. But right now, there's a glut of it, right? Can you talk a little bit about weighing things out, opportunity costs, and again, I myself, I like to go for sure things, but there's a lot of, and sometimes we're talking, you're the financial dude trying to cast, looking into the future, right? Which is, it's artistry more than anything else, right? Maybe you can speak to that.
Yeah, that blend of art and science often occurs to us. And that's one of the benefits of having a model like this. As any given moment, should any of you have any questions, what if we changed this assumption? And for example, the growth in construction cost in the model that we just ran is a 3% growth rate. So it matches up to actually the sales tax growth rate and fairly close to a normalized inflation rate over time. Now, can you have spikes in the construction costs? Absolutely. Have we seen those over the last 3 or 4 years? We absolutely have. And likewise, we've seen, I believe in 22, we saw double-digit growth rates in sales tax. But the year before, we had a decline in sales tax, right? So it's logical that you would have had a larger growth rate coming off of a decline year. So the model does give us the ability to test any change in conditions. Upon the request of the flood control district, we can pull up the model and test those at any time.
Mayor?
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mr. Chairman. It's probably for you, Steve. What do we have set aside, and does it change, and is it in a future plan for a catastrophic event, a major earthquake where infrastructure is really challenged? And is that considered something that you are considering as you look to whether it's caused by climate change or it is, you know, a major catastrophe? What do we have that protects ourselves in your plan?
So, well, we don't include anything in terms of catastrophic losses in this funding model. We're kind of just assuming a business as usual type of a situation, but in our day-to-day operations, we do have construction funding. We have the ability to shift money from funds to cover catastrophic losses if it were to occur. We do have a small buffer in our maintenance budget every year to account for cleanups and things like that during storm events, if we get more storm events than normal in a normal year. But you're talking about a major catastrophic situation. We would probably have to come to the board and shift funds to cover costs that related to that.
Well, and you look at interest rates and inflation, everything, the cost of everything, plus the employment. So I just didn't know where you find that, and where do you find it increasing as you plan out to 32 years?
Well, again, Mayor Goodman, the model isn't necessarily static. You know,
Right.
we input these assumptions and we can change those assumptions over time. But to the point of, you know, if there was a catastrophic set of circumstances, and by the way, you know, it was just 4 years ago that we had something like that. If you're an agency that's fully reliant upon sales and use tax, and you essentially close your economy for a period of time, that's rather catastrophic. But so you look to the operating practices of the entity, in this case, the district. Again, very conservative. On the debt side, not overburdened, right? So the cash that is available is more fungible. They stick to a minimum of a 3 times debt service coverage and never over-obligate the sales tax. So their ability to maintain liquidity during those periods is higher than some agencies that don't operate as conservatively. So again, I would say that those conservative financial practices better position them for dealing with economic uncertainty going forward. And once again, the model, anytime something like that comes up, we can have a conversation with Jessica and with Steve. What would it look like if we had to make this change? And we would be able to see the output of that fairly instantaneously.
Well, and I'm sure it would affect your plans for the future. It just, you know, as you're visiting California, or you look around the world with earthquakes and how, in particular, and then knowing our construction and infrastructure here, how do you prioritize that, and what's a general estimate of the funding, and then what stops as you look at future planning? I mean, obviously, the whole thing's, how do we know? We don't. But we need to have a plan that you trigger, and then where do you go first? Are you going to start in Boulder City, which I know the good doctor is expecting, and but really, is there that plan? And then how is that funded? Where does that money come from? So, just a request. You don't have to do it.
Agreed.
today.
I see what you're saying. I think we don't really want to put aside or have like a rainy day fund or something
Right.
like that,
We would.
because we want to optimize the construction of these facilities.
Right.
Keep in mind too that we recognize that as years go by, the facilities we built years ago are getting old. There is a finite life to these structures, and so over time, as time goes on, we're going to be kind of, moving from a new capital program to more of a repair and replace kind of a program because these facilities will be reaching the end of their useful life. And we're cognizant of that. We're starting an asset management program to look at the facilities and see what our needs are going to be, try to estimate those and try to plan for those in the future as well. So, I mean, the oldest facility we have that was adopted onto our plan when we were created in 1986 is a facility that was built in 1965. So we're getting some of these facilities already pretty old, and we're going to have to start looking at major repair and replacement as well.
Okay, well, thank you, thank you.
Yes, Mayor?
So if we just look backwards, let's just pretend something like COVID happened and our revenue went down. Looking backwards, does this looking forwards cover those kinds of things that we had in the past?
Well, it's difficult to incorporate something like a COVID into a future funding model because we don't really know, we can't predict the future that well. We don't know what's going to happen. But what I can say is that the way our business model is set up, we have some flexibility to weather storms like COVID. If we have a drop in sales tax, we're able to slow funding of construction projects. Now, keep in mind that when we fund a construction project, we fund it 100%. So that money is in the bank. So we don't stop construction that's already underway. But future projects, we can slow those up to account for that loss of funding and kind of weather that storm until we recover.
And we did recover.
We did, and we've done it with the 2008 recession as well as the pandemic.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Yep, Councilman. Councilman, can you use your microphone? Sorry.
Is this where we get our criteria for budgeting year to year? Are we using these estimates?
The financial funding model, do we use?
Well, for example, we look at what our sales tax has been for the last 12 months.
Yes.
It's gone up
Yes.
a little bit. Guy is suggesting that over the long term, he's estimating 3%. So as we budget, do we use the past 12 months as an example, or do we say we're going to stick at 3% and be more conservative as we create our annual budgets?
Yeah, we absolutely will modify things slightly depending on how the economy is going at the time we're doing the budget. So we do look at the last 12 months of sales tax. We look and see how the sales tax is compared to the budgeted resources from the prior year. But we also, by the time we're doing the budget, have actual sales tax data, not just estimates. Right. And so we replace the estimated amount with the actual amount, and we take a look at where we're at. So we do adjust it accordingly, and sometimes we raise it. And we also look at other agencies and see what they're doing in terms of estimating sales tax.
Just if I made an additional comment on that, because again, sales tax, which is of massive importance to an agency that's relying upon the sales tax. If you looked at the compound annual growth rate over a 10-year period prior to COVID, you would have undoubtedly seen growth rates in the 5 to 7% range, probably at least in that range. Then COVID happens, and you try to run another compound annual growth rate with the anomalies that happen during and following COVID, and that becomes quite a bit less useful, right? At this point, we believe that we've gotten through that 4 to 5 year period of abnormal growth in sales tax caused by COVID and the recovery period, plus the injection of all of the federal money that wouldn't have been a part of our regular economy, and how long it took to spend that down. I think the words used earlier, art and science, that's sort of where that comes together. We would like to think that we will overachieve the 3% we've used in this model. We would like to believe that.
That was the reason for my question, is I could see that we've allocated for COVID, but obviously I think that revenue stream is going to be slightly higher than the 3%. Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Hobbs, I had a question for you. So let's say at some point in the future, the board determines that they want to prioritize some amount less than $700 million in bonds for priority projects. What's the time between a board decision and actually putting projects on the street? And I ask that only because that's happened at SNWA. There were projects that were not a priority. Apex was not a priority, and then it became a priority. Water reclamation, same thing. We wasn't a priority, and then the board determined that it was a priority. So what's the time between board decision and actually putting projects on street?
To your question, and to directly answer it, if there was an initiation of a bonding process today, from the first action to the closing of the bonds, could be as much as 6 months.
Okay.
Half of that is taken up with a notice requirement of 90 days, and the rest is procedural. Some of it has to do with, the drafting of documents and the structuring of debt for something like the flood control district is not a terribly difficult thing to do, and the bonds are always readily marketable, but about a 6-month time frame. And that's why we try to work with the staff and use tools like the modeling to try to anticipate when those times may come, so you can initiate your process sooner.
Mr. Parrish, 6 months gives you enough time to sort of determine if there's projects and some additional time to consider what that would look like.
Yeah, in terms of funding, 6 months is pretty reasonable to get a bond issued. The question in my mind would be, would we have the plans and specs and everything we need to build the project done, which usually takes a little longer.
Right. Okay.
And Mr. Chairman,
Yep,
on
yeah.
that, would that be a simple majority or a super majority of this board? I mean, depending
Mr.
upon
Figgins?
that is, I mean,
I don't
that's something,
It's just a majority of the board. It could be done with the majority of the board.
Simple
okay.
majority.
I'm not sure, depending on the issue. That should probably be looked at.
We
too.
have different rules as to majority and 2/3 vote. In this case, it would just be a majority vote.
All right, if there's no other questions or comments, then we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you, Mr. Hobbs.
Thank you, Guy.
Thank you.
Item number 14 is comments by the general public.
This is the second time set aside for public comment. Anyone wishing to provide public comment with regards to any matters before the Regional Flood Control District, please step forward to the microphone, state your name, spell your last name, and please limit your comments to 3 minutes. Seeing none, we'll go ahead and close the second public comment period, and we are adjourned for the Regional Flood Control District, and we'll get started with the Regional Transportation Commission in a couple minutes. Thank you.
I